Big screen TVs are notorious for having really minuscule or poor sound quality. That's because just the dimensions of them dictate the fact that you can't fit a huge speaker into a thin LCD or OLED big screen TV. So soundbars are supposed to be a convenient solution to that, one piece of equipment that can bring expansive sound and that immersive, enveloping quality to the soundtrack of a movie or even a TV show. The KEF XIO is a perfect example of that. At $2,500, it's designed to pack a lot into this one component that you can hook up to your TV. Instantaneous surround sound. It has a lot of features to make that happen. It uses an HDMI 2.1 eARC connection for the TV. That's the enhanced audio return channel. It lets you control it via the TV so that it powers on and off when you do your TV as well. And the 2.1 spec allows it to handle uncompressed 192 kilohertz 24-bit audio directly from the set. There's also an Ethernet connection if you want to connect it to your network and do some more music over that. And there's an optical hookup as well, and a port for an accompanying subwoofer. We didn't find it necessary to test with a subwoofer. And in one sense, look, if you're going to add a subwoofer to this, then you might as well start looking at a fully separate sound system with separate components and satellite speakers. The convenience of this is it's all in one soundbar. KEF packs a whole lot of technology into the XIO. Let's go through some of the specifications just to give you an idea of how much is in this box. There are 12 individual drivers supported by 12 individual Class D amps. That's to keep the heat down to a minimum, for a total power rating of 820 watts. That's right, 820 watts. The system breakdown is 6 of KEF's 2-inch MX drivers to cover the higher and mid-range frequencies. Then there's 2 2-inch full-range drivers to give you more of the mid-range. And then there are 4 7-inch by 2-inch. They're oval drivers for the lower frequencies. These last drivers use what KEF refers to as velocity control technology, according to the company. Basically what it does is it monitors the incoming signal and attempts to prevent distortion by making sure it doesn't overdrive the cones on those 4 by adjusting the incoming signal. Moreover, to reduce unwanted vibrations in the box, which still can occur in such a compact piece of equipment, the bass drivers are mounted on opposite sides to each other so that they cancel out any unwanted vibrations. That's the design consideration here. So what's the goal of all of this hardware? Well, the whole intent is to give you a surround sound system with 5.1.2 channels. That includes the left and right channels, the center channel, 2 surround channels, 2 height or overhead channels, and a subwoofer channel, all from one piece of equipment. In order to do that, the KEF XIO has to support Dolby Atmos. That's pretty much a prerequisite today for any surround sound system, or for most high-end soundbars these days as well. The key to all this, in addition to all the multiple pieces of hardware in this box, are the DSPs, the digital signal processing that KEF does to make this all a reality, to make you feel like you are surrounded, and to give it true musicality as well. Once you've plugged it in, most of the setup for the KEF XIO is done via a smartphone app, which gives you a lot of flexibility. Actually, you can change buttons, the function of buttons on the candy bar remote control. It's standard as well with the soundbar. You can change the EQ settings. There's a music setting, a movie setting, a night setting to reduce the boomies so you don't disturb the neighbors or anybody else in the house, as well as a direct setting and a dialogue setting so you don't have to turn on subtitles in the movie you're watching. It's very helpful. You can also stream directly via the app and set it up with your own accounts if you've got Qobuz Tidal, which actually has Dolby Atmos music tracks, which we'll talk about in a bit, and also any other service like Amazon or Spotify, Deezer. You can do it directly from the app. Very handy. Calibration, yes, there's automatic built-in calibration using the microphones in the soundbar. We used it a few times in different locations, a large living room space and a smaller den or recreational space. It worked extremely well. I thought it made a substantial difference trying it without and then trying it after the calibration. So do use the calibration. I always recommend it. It gives it much more of a spatial, bigger sound stage. Definitely helps a lot. As well, there is an automatic setting for intelligent placement. As I said, you can leave this on the tabletop under the TV or hang it on a wall as well. That placement button automatically recognizes which position it's in. Also very handy, making it very easy to set up. So auditioning it as just a surround sound system for your TV, a convenient soundbar, does an excellent job. The KEF XIO certainly breathes new life into soundtracks and a lot of programming, bringing out precisely the background music and soundtracks. For an example, the tinkling of a piano and the saxophone in the background of a quiet conversation in this series I happen to like. Gigi Haru, it's Japanese, very interesting. And it can be quite limpid, open, and yet not thin or attenuated. Very much what probably was intended in these soundtracks, and I've heard them before on other sound systems. It's also excellent at rendering classical music, something that a lot of soundbars and surround sound systems, even separate systems, don't do particularly well. So if you like those British series with the rolling country estates and hills, this is ideal for that. So the KEF XIO is also great at placing voices in the correct position, basically the soundstage of a surround sound system, left and right, slightly above in some cases, and directly centered in the main dialogue. So again, you don't have to turn on those subtitles, which so many people do these days. Does it rival a surround sound system with multiple individual separate components? Yes and no. Yes, if what you're thinking of is musicality, frequency response, and that ability to give sort of a live feeling to the music, it does an excellent job of that. If you're thinking more of the surround sound, home cinema feel, music coming from all different angles and approaching you, then no, there is a limit. It does a great job at positioning some sounds and some effects that do seem to come from farther away. But in terms of recreating a system that has satellite speakers sitting directly behind your head, DSPs can only do so much. So keeping those caveats in mind, the KEF XIO still does an excellent job as a dessert topping and a floor wax. And it's going to best many separate systems that are just surround sound systems, especially when it comes to music. So a couple of music examples, a stalwart of music sound systems and separation and instruments and mixes is Pink Floyd's classic Dark Side of the Moon. It did an excellent job with the XIO in terms of making that stereo soundstage really come alive. It was a little narrower than some full stereo systems or full surround sound systems. On the other hand, it did an excellent job separating out a cymbal crash. The sweeps in time and money were very solid from one channel to another, something I would not have expected and don't usually hear from most soundbars. KEF XIO was able to hand that. Really impressive placement of the instruments, chimes and bells in different spots. A great job. The only thing in a single piece that I've heard was better are systems that are actually almost sound panels rather than sound bars. So in terms of that kind of musical reproduction, KEF does an excellent job. There's also a terrific dynamic range from the XIO. I have to say, The Doors, for example, showed some of that dynamic range when the music's over and you get to that sudden burst of Jim Morrison's yelps and howls and the expansiveness of the keyboard spreading out in the soundstage. Very well rendered, by this speaker system, as well as putting the guitars like dead center. Even when you come to classical music, for example, Mozart's Requiem D minor in Dolby Atmos, which is available, it helped give the choir a much more open sound that it deserved to have. I would say it was quite enjoyable listening to this. It's not going to be match that private listening room that you have and separate sound system, but it's a great compromise. The tenor sound and the basset horn or basset clarinet, it'll make you sit up and actually take notice. If the KEF XIO has a particular sonic personality, you're going to hear it in some of the classical music that we audition. Definitely. Acoustic piano, for example. Alexandre Tharos, his 24 recording of Bach's keyboard suite in A minor. It did the harmonics and transmitted the liveliness of the performance very well. I felt at the default settings, without tweaking anything in the EQ, it was a little overly bright for some of my taste. On the other hand, keyboard concertos by Haydn. There's a Norwegian chamber orchestra version from Warner Classics, and it really brought out the liveliness of the playing in there. It's a really great disc if you haven't heard it, but it's very good at recreating the sort of insouciant runs on the piano. Even, let's say, a Haydn cello concerto, C major. This was a great one by Stephen Isserlis. And if listening to that, it did an excellent job bringing out those string instruments as well. The soundstage felt a little closed, but it wasn't claustrophobic. So again, an excellent compromise if you've got to have one speaker in one room and you want to listen to music and watch movies. The XIO does a great job. So what about all this Dolby Atmos effect? Not every soundbar does have that. It's typically of higher end soundbars, I have to say. And there are some music tracks that are available from some services. Tidal, for example, has many, many Dolby Atmos music tracks. So over the course of our review weeks, we listened to a lot over this soundbar as well. I'll give you a couple of examples. The 21 Pilots, the City Walls track, it's in Dolby Atmos, and we found it did a very good job with the soundbar in terms of expanding the soundstage, mostly in the mid-range in the choruses. It did seem to broaden out the size of the soundstage, especially in the larger room. It does also sometimes feel somehow fake a little bit if you're comparing it directly to a separate system with all the multiple speakers. And it also seemed like the vocals were really enhanced in that Dolby Atmos mix. Another example of something that we really know very, 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 very well was the Beatles' Abbey Road, which I'm sure most people know pretty well. So it's a great example of to compare what it sounds like in Dolby Atmos. It did a great job, the XIO, of separating out the instruments. You can hear the double tracking, for example, that George Martin employed. And in the Dolby Atmos version of Abbey Road, the vocals are actually better than the other mixes I've heard. They're not seem to be attenuated as much or thinned out. There's a concentrated soundstage still in the Dolby Atmos version, but then when you hear the hammer, a Maxwell's hammer, it just jumps out from left to right. It really does makes you take notice. So depending on the track, depending on what you're listening to, it really can have a positive effect. One last item I feel compelled to make a few comments about is that, look, when you've got a system like this in a room that other members of the family may use, they're going to be listening to different music sources. They're not always going to be tuning in the ideal high-res music source that you and I would probably listen to all the time. And they're just going to conveniently hit a button, let's say for something like Pandora, a streaming service. What's remarkable, I found, about the KEF XIO is that it makes even music sources like that sound a whole lot better. It did an excellent job playing more of an open sound stage to Pandora, for example, which is pretty commendable. And it worked especially well when I left the EQ setting in movies because I just forgot to change it over. That's the benefit of having DSPs and that technology in an active speaker system or in a soundbar like this, that they can manipulate the sound and sometimes make it a whole lot better than it deserves to be, which the XIO managed to do. So, is the KEF XIO going to contend with a true 7.1 or 5.1 surround sound system with separate satellite speakers in terms of immersiveness, making you feel like you're in the movie? No, but it does a much better job musically than many such sound systems, which usually sacrifice fidelity for bombast. Those surround sound systems are awfully simply not made to reproduce music and can be, well, annoying when you try to play music over them. The KEF XIO is a solid compromise that gives you back some of the frequency range and tonal balance that, say, a $2,000 separate sound system with separate speakers usually lacks. And it avoids the sonic annoyances of those surround sound systems. The KEF XIO also presents some superior bass response without becoming boomy. I found a lot of soundbars go the other way. Try to push the bass too hard. KEF does not make that mistake. So, if you enjoyed this review, please subscribe to the Absolute Sound video channel and also consider subscribing to the Absolute Sound magazine. We love print. And of course, if you found this review helpful, add a thumbs up. For the Absolute Sound, I'm John Quain.